Hello, welcome to the second edition of the Warriors Stock Report. Tim Bontemps, senior beat writer for ESPN, here with Anthony Slater. We have a couple preseason games now in the books. Very important, life-changing stuff. We've decided exactly how the season is going to go, clearly based off of two games where the starters played a half each against the Lakers without LeBron and Luka, and the Blazers, who actually were pretty interesting in his game.
Shaedon Sharpe, stock up. Shaedon Sharpe, he
I
looks
was going to
good.
say the first stock up is Shaedon Sharpe, who has another 12 days to get a rookie contract extension done. And after he had, I believe, 22 points in 23 minutes in the first half of, mostly in the first half of this game Wednesday
I'll
night.
also say I
Get
saw
some money.
I saw a few Blazers people at halftime, and I was like, "Ooh, Shaedon Sharpe looked good." And they're like, "That's been about every day in camp. Like that wasn't like, oh wow, he just having a nice night. It's like he's kind of looked like this,
Yeah,
behind the scenes."
he is a super interesting dude. 22. I know it's the Warriors stock report, so we're obviously starting talking about the Blazers, but Shaedon Sharpe, 22-year-old guy, super toolsy athletic wing. He's one of the more interesting restricted guys or rookie extension guys over the next week and a half. My guess is he's going to get a deal done ultimately. But, like you said, it's not surprising if that happens. If he can play anything like this year, the Blazers will be excited. But we should start there. I know, we're anxious to talk about the lineup. So I'll just put the question to you: stock up or stock down on the Warriors frontline players through the first, I guess, 48 minutes of game action for them in the preseason?
Yeah, I mean, one by one, it's probably different. I mean, I think we should get to Al Horford because I think he's been one of the stories of
Well,
camp.
let's start there. Al
Yeah,
Horford, stock up or stock down?
I would say up, which is interesting because, if you just look statistically, I think he only played 11 minutes last night, missed all four of his shots. I think he's 1 of 7 shooting.
Yep.
But, the bigger picture is like, the fit when you talk to people behind the scenes, which, it's not a surprise. You were around him in Boston. You know what type of, leader and player he is, the type of care the way he's aged, obviously, is good. So, he had that give and go in the first game with Steph Curry that Steph was kind of glowing about a little bit post game. And Steph loves passing bigs. And it's the way it's been put to me, with Al is like Kevon Looney, but add a, high volume 3-point shooter, within the skill
Yes.
set, which is hugely important because it cracks open so many theoretical lineups. And even potentially can solve some of the Kuminga, fit issues if you can really kind of get him in 4 or 5 lineups with Kuminga. So stock up on him, but they're still searching. I think properly using preseason to really kind of like try to find various lineup combinations, and it's not just a front court thing to me. It's the shooting guard. Last night, Steve Kerr tried out Moses Moody at the 2. Moses Moody's almost,
Well, can we let's just step down for a second. So
Okay.
I watched the first halves of both these games too. I would agree, especially in that game Sunday. I was not surprised, like you said, that Steph and Al were talking after the game about immediately having chemistry on the court. These are two of the smartest players in the league. Al's been a great read and react player for a long time. He's going to be diming guys up for passes. Like that cut that Steph made to go past Dalton Connect to get that layup and get the highlight where he's pointing at the camera is like exactly the kind of thing I would see Al Horford doing well with Steph. He does a lot of the stuff that Draymond Green does offensively. Plus, he's an excellent shooter. And
Who he reminds me of? David West during those like
yes,
kind of dynasty days. But
yes,
obviously David West, again, if you stretch it out to 26 feet.
100%. Another
Yeah.
super high IQ guy, tough, incredibly well respected veteran, happy to play whatever role is required. So yeah, I'm not surprised about the fit. I know Draymond hit a couple threes in this Portland game. Watching Draymond shoot, though, like he's also just going to open up the court when you have him out there with Draymond, even if Draymond's nominally the center. Like having Al out there, having the ability to play another big with him who could shoot and space the floor, I think will help the Warriors on a lot of levels. They're just going to obviously have to manage his minutes, something that the Celtics have done the last few years. I'm sure the Warriors will do more of too. But the thing I wanted to ask you was, so first game, they start, the three mainstays, Draymond, Butler, and Steph. They're obviously going to start. And then they start Moses Moody and Brandin Podziemski, as the 4th and 5th guys. Then in the second game, they again start Moses Moody, and they start Al Horford instead of Podziemski in that game. So I guess obviously we're only a couple games in. As you said, they're correctly experimenting. We talked on the first edition of the report how the Warriors have a ton of different lineup combinations they can go to, and they're obviously still getting up to speed after getting these guys signed late, et cetera, et cetera. But if you had to guess right now, after seeing this first couple games, what do you think the opening lineup is, or the most used starting lineup? Because obviously Al and some of these guys are only going to play every so often. And what do you think it should be if it's not the one you think Steve ultimately will go with to start?
Well, and I think it's possible he does it matchup based, where the first game, and this might be an indictment of DeAndre Ayton dominating, but Steve went small partly because I don't think he viewed Ayton as a guy who was going to like really pound Draymond and go into the block and
Yep.
fight for every offensive rebound. And part of the reason he decided to start Horford in the second game was Clingan, right? 7'3". I mean, you saw it early. Clingan got a few offensive rebounds over Al
Yes.
Horford, but it's a active strategy of them not to overburden Draymond Green. That's part of the Al Horford benefit. And I think against the Nuggets in game 2 of the season, I would expect Al Horford to start because he's facing Nikola Jokic, and I don't think they want to start Draymond on him. Whereas game
Well, all
one,
right. Well then, okay. So let me back up then, because
yeah,
that's a very political answer, though I do think it's also a correct answer. I'm kidding about the political answer part.
no,
What
well,
do you think? What do you think the most likely, if we're just going to say in a vacuum,
yeah,
what do we think the preferred starting lineup will be from Steve Kerr, and what do you think the preferred lineup should be?
I think it would be Steph Podziemski at the 2, Jimmy, Draymond, Horford. I think that'll probably be the most likely, regularly used starting lineup when everybody's healthy. Because, most teams have big bruising centers. And I think, I know Draymond prefers, especially early in the season, at urgent time, prefers to play the 4 to start games. He loved it when Looney was in there. So and I say Podziemski at the 2, even though I know Moody started at the 2 yesterday, because Steve Kerr says he wants to get a look at, Moody as this on ball, hound, because that's what they're searching for. That's one of the issues on the roster. Gary Payton II has not looked terrific early on. I think he's a minus 23. They've been, not great in his minutes.
No.
DeAnthony Melton's going to be out, at least, a month or more. And they just believe they need a guy to throw at, guards to start games. But the problem is, and Steve will say this, is like when you take Podziemski out and put Moody in, you lose ball handling, playmaking, capabilities. So I think he's going to eventually land on that 5 as like kind of maybe the preferred regular starting lineup. But he's the one he started in game 1. People got to remember, which is the small ball lineup, which is Moody and Podziemski in there. Horford out, Draymond's playing the center. They were, I'm looking now, plus 85 and 211 minutes late last season. They are using that lineup, and Steve is openly saying he knows he needs to use that lineup sometimes to start games, sometimes within games, because their data behind the scenes tells him how good that was. When everybody talks about that great Jimmy Butler stretch down the end of the season, that was the lineup that succeeded for them. Moody and Podziemski took off after the Butler trade. So on certain nights where either Al Horford's not available, which by the way, as you would know, might be a decent amount of nights, or they just are like, hey, small ball's the way to go tonight. Maybe again, opening night, you're facing Ayton and the Lakers, and I know they kind of believe they can out small ball the Lakers, and that's the way to beat them. I can see them starting with that unit that they know their lineup data tells them has succeeded in the regular season prior.
Well, and that I think the last part, right? To me, this really is a question. And look, it's only 2 games, so we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but it really feels like this is a question that comes down to Moses Moody or Brandin Podziemski as the 5th guy, right? Because I think I was sort of curious if you would lean into what I thought you'd say, which is when Al Horford's healthy and playing, more often than not, he's going to start.
Yeah.
So, and we know the other 3 guys are going to start. So now you're really just down to one backcourt spot. And to me, actually, I would argue that Moses Moody is a better fit with the group the Warriors now have than Brandin Podziemski, who is a little bit more of an on-ball guy, solid shooter, but kind of a combo guard, likes to have the ball in his hands. I would say maybe isn't quite as good of a defender or a different kind of defender than Moses Moody. He's a little longer. Moses is a good spot-up shooter. He's already hit, I think, 7 threes in 2 preseason games. And when you have Jimmy who's going to have the ball in his hands a lot and Steph is going to have the ball in his hands a lot, and Draymond and Horford, who are both kind of, going to handle it a little bit, can do the dribble handoff stuff, can operate out of the high post or at the top of the key with the ball, and are going to. Would it not make a little more sense to have a guy who's more of a 3-and-D spot up shooter kind of guy as the fifth piece there?
It feels like a more traditional lineup. He feels like a more traditional shooting guard, and like it's fascinating to see the Warriors do that because they're so untraditional typically in the way they do lineups. I would say two things, having talked to Steve plenty about this type of stuff. Like, number one, he's like loves Podziemski and will always point to like how he unlocks so many lineups. He talked, connector. He loves to use the connector word.
Yes.
Even as he's playing the lineup yesterday, you can feel his apprehension. Well, like we lose the connection out there. We lose that extra playmaking and zipping them up in transition. And so Steve's adoration for Podziemski matters within this conversation.
For sure.
And also, when we'll see, like they say he's had an unbelievable camp. And every time if Steve's asked like, hey, who's kind of stood out, like first name he mentions, and I can feel the fans listening, like rolling their eyes about it a little bit, but like, I
so even coming off, so I guess even coming off of this rough game off the bench against Portland, we would say stock up for Brandin Podziemski so far.
I mean, overall in camp, like if you listen to what they're saying,
that's what I mean. Like from the Warriors' perspective, they would say stock up for.
Yeah, and if you're just talking about his prospects of getting that starting two guard spot, I would also say after yesterday, stock up a little bit because like that Moody lineup didn't work. They got pounded out of the gate.
Yes.
And I'm not blaming anybody or saying that lineup can't work, but like if Steve's already going to do it a little apprehensively and trying to see this unit and it's not, it doesn't give a good first dip of lineup data. The other thing is like, I do think, like I said, there are nights and maybe it's just when Al Horford doesn't play, but he will go with that small starting lineup where the answer is both of them because he really does like that unit. Yeah,
I mean, I do think when Al isn't playing, which is going to be a decent amount of the time, he will not play in a back-to-back and shouldn't. I do think that small ball group they started in the first game is the one that they'll go to, and I think makes a lot of sense. Like Podziemski and Moody on the wings with Jimmy as kind of a small ball 4, and then Draymond at the 5. Like,
what else?
I like that lineup a lot.
You know what else it does? Like Draymond and Al Horford are not 35-minute per night type guys, right?
No.
At this point, you're talking like probably like mid to high 20s for Al, and like
especially in the regular season. Like the Celtics. Not to interrupt, but the Celtics last year, when Al Horford, you should talk to Al about this at some point. Whenever the Celtics played a really good team, Al was awesome and was totally locked in and looked like he was shot out of a cannon. There was a stretch back in March last year when they played, I want to say they played like, I think Golden State might have come in then, but it was because I think they were there for Sloan maybe, but they played like the Thunder, the Nuggets, the Cavs, the Knicks, and some other really good team. I might have been Golden State or the Lakers or somebody, all in a stretch in like a week and a half at home. They had this whole like 10 or 12 day stretch where they played all the best teams in the league. And Al was amazing in basically every one of the games. And he, at this point in his career, as he's approaching his 40th birthday, is a guy who has to get up, I think, to play against some of these teams. So, but the Celtics did a great job, and they had a lot of bigs so they could do it, of basically never playing him more than 20, 25 minutes a game during the regular season and never playing him in back-to-backs and giving him plenty of days off so that when they got to the spring, the theory was, all right, now Al's ready to go, and if he needs to play 30, 35 minutes in a game or a couple games or a series, he can. So that, I think, is something that should inform people and how they look at what Al Horford's role is going to be in Golden State. I would not expect it to be playing. I'm not even sure I'd play him 28 minutes a game. I think he should be 24 or less just to make sure he's fully ready for the spring.
And that I'm trying like building off that point, Draymond's only a 31, 32 minute type player. And yes, it makes sense to start them together for various reasons, including that, you would assume that would be your best lineups and you want to save some of the wear and tear on Draymond. But at the same time, I could definitely hear the argument of wanting to separate them a little bit too. So you almost, if you have a certain amount of total minutes from the two, you want at least one of the two of them on the floor at times. And like Al makes a lot of sense for some of these second units. I mean, the Kuminga, situation that they're trying to maximize what Kuminga is for two reasons, right? To use him or, bump his trade value up. And that's why I think partly they're thinking about maybe not always starting Al is because if you have to spread a limited amount of minutes between the two of them, the more you overlap them, the more you're going to have them neither on the floor at
Yes.
the same time. So
Yes.
that's what they're trying to, that's what this preseason's about, right? Steve trying to figure out, you know, tricky lineup combinations and what's working, what's not.
Well, I guess just to open the floor to you. So we'd say Al Horford stock up. Sounds like we mostly say Brandin Podziemski, at least from a Warriors perspective, stock up. Where do you want to go next? What stood out through these first couple games? Stock up or down?
Yeah, I would say, I mentioned Gary Payton a second. I do think like, he's always been like one of their wild card players. And he's looked a little bit creaky or in again, it's two preseason games, but like I said, his lineup numbers have not been good. And that's
Minus 23 in 2 games.
yeah. To
Deal.
the bigger point there, though, is like I think like on ball stopper type dudes is one of the weaknesses they're trying to shore up. It's why they brought back Peyton, but brought in Melton, who worked so well
Anthony
in
Melton, who's
the,
still
the
out with
greatest
torn
6 games in Warriors history.
ACL. Yeah.
And
Well,
Kuminga's
to your
yeah,
point, look at Shaedon Sharpe in this game Wednesday, right?
yeah.
Shaedon Sharpe was unstoppable. He was getting wherever he wanted on the court.
Mhm.
He was getting in the lane and kicking out to shooters a couple times. He was able to get to the basket at will. He blew by Podziemski. He blew by anybody who was guarding him. Like, that is an area where, and look, Shaedon Sharpe is one of the most athletic players in the league. So if he starts to turn a corner, he might do that to a lot of people. But if you're looking at Golden State and you're saying, all right, how's this team going to do if they're in a Houston Rockets series and they got to guard Amen Thompson with the ball, or they got to guard, a Lakers team with Luka Doncic and LeBron with the ball, or they got to guard Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Anthony Edwards or whoever, like that's a role that matters. And,
Yeah,
certainly
and the
Sharp
four
looking like a Hall of
guys.
Famer is not ideal from that
Yeah,
standpoint.
and the four guys that all have various question marks again are Melton with the injuries coming back from, Peyton with just age and availability.
And a lot of
Moody
injuries too that have slowed him down potentially.
Moody has gotten more athletic and gotten laterally quicker over the years and smarter, and they're really trying that's why Steve started him at the 2. That's what they're trying to make him into, the guy they can, put on the ball early in the games to really activate him. But again, in the first game, they liked his activity. He also had 4 fouls in the first half in that game. And then Kuminga's the wild card there where the tools are there and he says the desire's there to be a two-way guy, and we'll see. But that to me is something they're searching for, because we know with their defense, they're going to win with brains. They're going to be a just really sharp schematic defensive unit, but they don't have rim protection. And if you can't really stop the ball that well and you can't, block shots at the rim, as smart as you are and rotationally savvy, and you're going to throw some zone defenses in there, like it's just tough to construct as good a defense as they want, which is like a top 5 type unit.
Yeah.
Unless you stop the ball. If you can't stop the ball and you can't protect the rim, like it'll be harder for them to be elite on that end.
No, I actually would push back a little bit on the rim protection thing. I think between Al Horford and Draymond, they have pretty good rim protection. I'm not saying they have prime Rudy Gobert or Victor Wembanyama or somebody like that, but I wouldn't say
it's like rotational placement of rim protection for sure. I guess I mean more like if Al Horford and Draymond are just sitting there having to put out fire after fire because it's just blow by after blow by, like it just compromises everything else you're trying.
That's the part that I was gonna get to, right? I think the rim protection is fine and good enough, or it's adequate, I would say, right? Yeah. But the bigger issue is if the ball's just getting to the rim over and over again, it doesn't matter if you have good rim protection, right? It's like, to go back to mention Rudy Gobert, the thing that everybody didn't understand. I mean, there was that series with the Clippers against the Wolves, right? Or against the Jazz right before the trade, when Rudy Gobert's at the rim and the Clippers without Kawhi are just driving to the rim over and over again and like scrambling Rudy out to the 3-point line, right? And everybody was clowning on Rudy Gobert for trying to guard 3-point shooters, and it was a mess. And the thing people didn't understand about what was going wrong for Utah wasn't that it was a Rudy Gobert problem. It was the fact that it was Rudy Gobert in the middle, surrounded by 4 guys who couldn't stop the ball. So if you're Rudy Gobert and you're trying to guard 1-on-5 on defense, it doesn't matter if you have Rudy Gobert or Victor Wembanyama or anybody. they have to guard 5 guys on the court and you could just drive and kick for threes, doesn't matter how good your defense is, it's not going to work. And that, to your point, Steph is obviously a fine defender, but if you are not really able to stop the ball and it's repeatedly getting into the paint, that is always the first thing that's going to cause defensive breakdowns for a team to have. And it was the thing that caused the Blazers to be able to get into the paint over and over again last night and do whatever they wanted in the first half. And I think they had 73 points. Like, that's not the Blazers might have a really good defensive team, but the Blazers are not supposed to be a good offensive team. Having 73 points and a half against mostly starters is not, that's not what Steve Kerr and those guys are looking for.
Yeah, against a team that says they want to win on that end, right? They were number one after the All-Star break in defense last year. That's how they're supposed to win. And to do that, stop the ball. And so I guess that's my overarching stock down is like the perimeter defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Where are you at through a couple games on Quinten Post, who you talked about it last week? Having both he and Al Horford as true space fives would kind of give Golden State a dimension they really haven't had in a long time. Like he obviously hit a bunch of shots last night, at least late in the game. What do you think his role looks like going into next season? Or this season, I should say.
Yeah, they're gonna have him in some of those second unit lineups, and it's purely because it's like again they're trying to finally get into the modern era of basketball where your center can shoot. They drafted Quinten Post for that reason. Now they've also Quinten Post's work over the last 2 years has been very much focused on getting stronger, getting more physical, learning
more mobile.
How to be kind of a slower footed, thinner center and still survive in the league. And that's where like Al Horford will be really important. He's, the one thing I will say about Quinten Post, like he's a worker and he's like really a student. Like, you go out to the court, he'll be sitting there with Terry Stotts, on the laptop looking at stuff. I've seen him several times having conversations with Zaza Pachulia, who's still in the organization. Now Al Horford, you hear he's just like, he's just asking a lot of questions. So he's working to get there. They like his toughness. Like it's not like a soft mentality type thing, but it's just body type. And there's a reason he dropped to 52nd in the draft. It's just concern about like survival defensively. And you're not going to give it the ball to him in the post. So what he has done well and has made himself carved out a role in the league is he's a high volume 3-point shooter. I think it was like 9 threes per 36 last year, like one of the top guys in the league, certainly as a 7-footer. So he'll be there to help unlock lineups, but if he's just getting bully balled inside, or I remember a Thunder game last year, they started him and it was just like the first quarter was like 42 Thunder points and it was just Shai Gilgeous-Alexander calling up Quinten Post, man, pick and roll, drop coverage, jumper, and they had to just get him off the floor. So there's still some of that they're working through, but he'll have a role. Right now he seems a little bit over Trayce Jackson-Davis in the pecking order because they are valuing the stretch 5 over the like lob threat.
Well, and if you're going to play him off the bench, right, it makes sense. If you're picking one of those guys to come off the bench, to me, it makes a lot of sense to have Quinten Post do it. Because if you have him and Buddy Hield come out there in the second unit, like it looks like they're going to do, that's a ton of shooting. And it's going to be very hard for teams to guard those groups, especially if you have Jimmy or Steph out there with the ball with those guys, right? Like the floor is going to be wide open. And the other thing is, if you're playing against second units, typically it's going to be easier to hide a guy like that, right? And then, okay, like Trayce Jackson-Davis can do some stuff, but to me, it's more likely to me that he is a guy who spots as a starter on games where they need a big and Al Horford can't play, or if Al's banged up or Draymond's banged up or whatever, than it is he fits in with a second unit like this, where they're clearly trying to reorient it in a different direction. And the other reason Quinten Post makes sense to play with the second unit is where Jonathan Kuminga is going to be playing. Yeah. And you have talked a lot about the addition of another space big along with Quinten Post and Al Horford to give Kuminga more room on the court. We talked last week after he signed that the Kuminga camp was happy about Al Horford signing for that reason. I would say the first 2 games for Jonathan have been kind of a good example of the good and bad in terms of what he can do. Like okay first game, not as great second game, playing 18-ish minutes off the bench. Feels kind of like what the role is going to be. Has shown some flashes, good and bad, at least to me.
He's overpassing. I think he's coming in. This is just my belief
Trying to
with
play
like,
along.
yeah, too much, and it's this is the challenge for him. And this is why it's not that great of a roster fit. And this is why, it's like he wants to spread his playmaking wings and his primary creation wings, but he knows the coaching staff doesn't want it. So
Well,
at
and it's also
times,
just not needed on this team. That's the problem,
yeah,
right?
yeah, which he knows,
Right.
it's why he's kind of
Right.
trying not to be on this team.
Yes. Not kind of.
Uh, and so now he's coming back and he's trying to play ball, which, you should give him professional credit for attempting to, but then it's tough because it's like you can tell it's like feels like just a suppressed version of himself offensively. And really in game one, I thought he made some nice passes. Even last night, there were some missed threes, but there's, ping sprays to the corner, and he got Podziemski a couple open threes. Like, I think some of the passing is good, but I know I know there was a time in last night's game where the vets were like, hey, get aggressive, go to the rim. Because there is, again, Minnesota series is a good example. There is going to be times this team does need, hey, power, like go to the rim. We need somebody to go do something. And it's very difficult for him, I think, mentally, where he's trying to suppress that side of him because he's repeatedly being told, like, we don't want that, we don't want that, we don't want that. And then there are pockets of the game, there'll be pockets of the season where they'll say, now go do that. And it's just like it's just hard for him to throttle it on and off, where it's like either tell him to be what he wants to be, or if you tell him he can't be what he wants to be, you can't just be like, well, for these 3 possessions we need you to be. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
seeing in these preseason games.
And it highlights the overall issue that you just laid out, and what we talked about. Everybody who followed the Warriors has talked about for a long time with Jonathan Kuminga with this team, right? And I thought the play that almost perfectly summed up his situation was one that became kind of a highlight play, which was in the first half of the Laker game. He catches the ball on the wing. He's wide open at the 3-point line. Has to take that shot, right? Doesn't take it. Kind of drives into the lane, gets a guy up in the air, makes kind of a weird up and under kind of flip shot move, and rolls in and gets
I
fouled.
believe that was Ayton just flying at a pump
Yes, that's right. And like, that is the problem with Kuminga's fit on the Warriors, right? Because you're right. There are times where his straight line driving and his ability to get to the rim is going to be important. And if he can get to the foul line along with Jimmy, if he can like become a guy that gets a few foul shots a game and is aggressive in that manner, that could really be a useful thing for them, right? But he also needs to be a guy that can really guard on the ball and can hit it open three. And that's just not his skill set. He can guard on the ball some, for sure, but he's not going to be a guy who's going to be comfortable taking a lot of catch and shoot threes. And that's it's one play. Obviously ended up making a little bit of a play out of it, got a layup, but the fit is just clunky. It's going to be clunky. Everybody knows that. And like you said, I do think it's good and not super surprising that he showed up and is trying to get along and play along with everybody and fit in. And not to use an old LeBron term about Kevin Love, fit out instead. But it does feel like this is just going to be the inevitable way this is going to go, until there's either an injury to the main guys, or they're able to find a deal after January 15th to move them somewhere else.
Yeah, and there's just the reality of like the human at the center of this that I think some people at times fail to realize, where like the Houston to Minnesota series last year is a great example, where it's like in the Houston series, you're again telling them suppress, 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 suppress. And then the moment Steph strains the hamstring, it's like, no, now
have
go
as much as you can eat.
Yes.
Go for it.
And it's like he's been on this roller coaster. And again, he's being told right now and willingly doing it to suppress, suppress, suppress. But then again, there are times within the game where people are like, no, now go do it for 2 possessions. And it's just, you could tell he has to take himself, his brain one place, and kind of like put it there and say, hey, for the first 3 weeks of the season, I'm just going to do what you're telling me to do. And I do think, and it's a young player thing, but he's having a hard time, like, kind of feeling out when to go do some of the stuff for a few possessions that he wants to do, and then when not to. And then suddenly you see the hesitation, the pressing, he's turning it over. Because like I do think there is a good creative score in there that should get some runway to see it out on another team. I think you saw it in the Minnesota series. Like the Timberwolves had a really difficult time in the second round of the playoffs staying in front of him. He was cooking Naz Reid. He was scoring 20 something a game on
Yep.
54% shooting. And he wants, like, if he knows that is his role going into the game for like the extension of the game, I do think he could do a lot of stuff. But
The guy he reminds me of
yeah,
a lot is Brandon Ingram, right? Who's another guy who puts up numbers on not so good teams, which I
who
think
was great in the state capitol last night in Sacramento. He had like,
at
I
it
think,
well.
24.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I really want to be paying Brandon Ingram $40 million like Toronto is? No. Do I want to really be having Jonathan Kuminga be my number one or two option on offense? No, I don't. But like if I'm Jonathan Kuminga, like Brandon Ingram, not a guy super comfortable taking catch and shoot threes, likes to shoot the mid range, can obviously create his own shot, gets to the line some, right? Like I think if I'm Jonathan Kuminga and Aaron Turner, I look at Brandon Ingram signing 3 for 120, and that's the path, right? We can do that. Well, for a lot of reasons, as we've laid out, that doesn't work for the Warriors. And it doesn't work if you're really trying to win at the highest level if you're the Warriors. So, what is the way that they find a way for everybody to sort of get through the next few months? And I do think the fact that Kuminga has got, and you even talked about this last week, the fact that Kuminga showed up and gotten along with everybody and done his best to fit in is not really a surprise. And I do think is largely what the next few months will look like because everybody is aligned on what the ultimate end game is to attempt to be, which is to find a new home for everybody here in 3 months. But it doesn't mean it's going to be a smooth sailing from a fit and
Yeah.
time
He
and
he is what
production
he
standpoint till then.
he is what he doesn't necessarily want to be, which is the insurance policy. He's when guys are out. And I expect Jimmy to miss one of the next couple preseason games and Draymond to miss one of the next couple preseason games. And I believe they're probably going to split that up, and that'll be an opportunity, for
We'll probably
maybe
start
he's
both
starting.
games. Yeah.
Maybe he's starting in the place of both of them.
You would
in
think
the
so,
very
right? I mean, that
yeah.
would make sense, both from just like a good faith, like play along standpoint from the team side, and also like if one of those guys isn't playing, like he should start. There's really not a better option for
Yeah. I
him
mean,
to
especially if
play.
you saw it last year, but if Jimmy or Steph is out, like you really need a score.
Yeah.
So
And having him out there with Horford, like an interesting lineup to see would be him in place of Draymond. And like whether it's Moody or Podziemski with Steph, with Jimmy, and without Horford. Like that's an interesting lineup. I would like to see what that looks like. That could in theory be pretty good, potentially.
Yeah. So there'll be some of that, but like again, it's all dripping in the 4 years of scar tissue
Yes.
and the reality that he knows I am an insurance policy. Like,
Yeah. So I was going to ask, we got to wrap up, but before we did, I was going to ask, what should we watch for over the next week?
again, some of those lineup combinations. I mean, if you care about like back end of the roster stuff, I thought this LJ Cryer kid from Houston last night, he scored like 16 in the fourth or something in their comeback. Like to me, him trying to like maybe grab one of the two-way spots. Will Richard, the rookie who they put on the roster last night, was really good. Especially if we're talking preseason games, and if anybody is actually watching the second half of these games, like that's oftentimes where we're like back end of the roster type stuff is figured out. The two guard spot, which you mentioned, it's interesting to me that it is such a Moody Podziemski conversation where people remember the playoffs. It was Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield scoring 30 something in game 7, and he's starting.
Do you think it should be a three-way battle for that?
Not really, because Buddy Hield is kind of your regular season bench guy, microwave guy. And I talk to Buddy plenty, and like he kind of understands that like that on this team at this time as they're trying to grow these young guys.
I do really like the post Hield, like come in and just have max floor spacing and cook lineup too. Like I think I think that overall is a chance to be a pretty good second unit path. Because to me, if
and the reality is like in the Houston series, the Rockets put a center on Moses Moody, and that screwed his whole playoffs up. He basically got out of the rotation. Then they sent him into the summer and said, hey, work on, being the screen man and high pick and roll and working on dive stuff so they can try to solve some of that issue. But Buddy Hield was elevated into such more of a prominent role because in the playoffs you can scheme against that type of stuff. But again, early in the season, it makes sense to try to see if Moses Moody can solve some of that. And Buddy's going to be there, and if it gets to a point that it makes sense to elevate him to the starting lineup, he will. So I'm not surprised that he's not part of the conversations. It is just interesting because he was the starting shooting guard in the playoffs and actually performed very well at key moments, and then he comes to the season not really in the conversation.
Yeah, will be interesting to see. So, all right, thank you as always for following along with us for the stock report. We'll be back again next week, wrap up the preseason, and see where some of this stuff lands. Slater, we got anything for people to be watching out for over the next week, or are we just getting ready for the season to start?
Yeah, I'll have a couple stories coming out over the next couple weeks, maybe bigger picture type things, but I'll save that for next week. I'll talk about one of them that I will have dropping next week when right before it's dropping.
Awesome. That's great. Well, look forward to talking about that. Thank you to everybody for watching and listening to the Stock Report, and we'll talk to you again next week. I'm on fire. It's NBA,